We are talking Suitable Flesh, directed by Joe Lynch and adapted from H.P. Lovecraft, The Thing at the Doorstep. And this one stars Heather Graham, Barbara Crampton and Bruce Davison. Now, I will say before I go any further in this review, it will kind of have some mild spoilers. It's something that's just kind of revealed early on in the movie, and you may already know if you've kind of seen a trailer and stuff, but I actually have to say I think it will help understand this movie, because one of the critiques I will have is that it's a little confusing in the beginning. So if you haven't seen it and you want to watch this review, I'm going to kind of reveal something that isn't apparent the first few minutes you're watching this movie, but get revealed relatively early on at the end of the first act. So bear that in mind. So if you're still here, let's go with the plot here. So it focuses on Heather Graham's character, who is a psychiatrist, and she gets this new patient who kind of turns up, this kind of young boy who seems to have an extreme version of multiple personalities. And she's kind of intrigued and ultimately becomes a little obsessed with him. And as the film progresses, we learn that in actual fact it's far worse than multiple personalities. He actually is some type of being who is able to kind of switch bodies, and he does this through arcane kind of rituals. And he ultimately wants to take over Heather Graham's body, and it kind of goes in between this kind of where the bodies are kind of switching. So kind of the body swap genre is normally reserved for kind of comedies, but here it is in a kind of horror movie. So that's your basic premise, and that was ultimately the spoiler. Like I said, it's revealed probably around the end of the first act, so it's but I gotta be honest with you, I think it helps whilst watching this movie, because the first act is a little confusing. We'll come on to that. But let's talk about what I think works in this film. I think once you kind of understand what's going on, this movie becomes very intriguing. Once you kind of get the concept, I actually think you can enjoy this movie a little more, which is why I'm kind of quite, happy to kind of say what the premise is, because I didn't know anything about this film, and that first act I was like, I don't know what's going on. But once you kind of understand what is going on, it kind of clicks into place that little bit more, and I think kind of you can enjoy the film and are able to kind of follow it, and it becomes like an intriguing kind of battle of wits. It also kind of harkens back to the glory days of the erotic thriller, because this movie is quite sexual in nature. This kind of entity, which ultimately is jumping from body to body, seems to have quite this sexual appetite, and this movie is quite kinky at times, to be brutally honest. So it has that horror version of a body swap movie, but with that kind of extra element of erotic thriller as well. And this movie does have violence in it, and some kind of some gore sequences, particularly in the third act. So that was interesting. Now I have to say, as the film progresses, I quite enjoyed the character work here. It was a little rough initially, I won't lie, and I'm going to come on to a little bit more about that. I really enjoyed Barbara Crampton's character, who is a psychiatrist friend from the Heather Graham character. I enjoyed their chemistry together and enjoyed their relationship, and as the film kind of progresses, I mean, she has more of a pronounced role in the film. I enjoyed that. But I think some of the performances are mostly pretty good, and I did enjoy Heather Graham's performance. I think her character was a little poorly written at times, but I enjoyed her performance in it. And when we do get these these moments, there is some pretty. I mean, I've given you the basic premise, but there's plenty of stuff to get your teeth sunk into, and that you can enjoy it. So you kind of watch this movie and go on the the thrill ride that it is, and it does have this race against time quality to it, which you can really feel ups the stakes. And I think that obviously it's you know, it's quite an exciting movie in that. And even though it's not like a large scale movie with kind of big VFX and stuff, you still have that kind of like running out of time kind of feeling, and people have got, you know, limited kind of you know, options and things like that. So I kind of quite enjoyed the pacing of the film. When we do see VFX, I think they are to a good standard, and you know, they're pretty kind of gruesome at times, and because the movie's not full of them, it kind of really only happens really in the final act of the movie. It hits pretty hard. So I quite enjoyed that. As I've kind of alluded to, one of the problems I have with this movie, and I have two real problems with this film. The biggest one is I think the first act is confused. It's you don't really get what I think is going on. Partially because there's kind of 3 people involved initially, and it's kind of like I don't really understand what I'm watching. I mean, now I've kind of given you the basic premise, it might be easier and I can have a watch, but I didn't know anything about this film. So I have to say, but that initial setup I think is confused. It's not particularly a great setup. Secondly, and then kind of sticking with that first act, I have to say I didn't like the Heather Graham character first of all. I thought she was particularly unprofessional as a psychiatrist, which really made me not want to root for her as a kind of a lead character. As the film progresses, I feel you kind of warm to the character as it goes on. But in that initial kind of first act of the film, I have to say I thought she was extraordinary, or her character was extraordinarily unprofessional, which makes for her to be a kind of quite hard character to root for. And the only other thing I would say is the actor who plays our kind of a male lead, who is this patient, I don't know if it was the best actor. I have to say it's the one kind of performance where I feel wasn't quite on par with the others. It wasn't terrible, but I just didn't think it was a little bit kind of like hammy at times, I have to say. The actor is asked to play ultimately 2 roles because he's playing different people in his body, and probably more than 2 to be fair. But I don't know if he was quite as strong as actor as maybe like Heather Graham and kind of Barbara Crampton, for example. So I feel that his acting, although not terrible, it was a little below, less than some of the others. But the main issue for me, I think the first act could have been a little smoother, kind of, you know, a little bit clearer what's going on. I get that it wants to have this reveal, but I think it's confused and doesn't kind of make a lot of sense. It's also one of those films where it has a scene that happens towards the end of the movie at the beginning, and then you kind of watch it in recap, which is a trope I hate, because you always know that that's going to happen at some point in the movie. So you're kind of like, well, I know that's still to happen, so I know the stakes. I know this person isn't going to be in danger, or what's going to happen to them. So it's a trope I personally hate. So what do we think about this movie overall? After a bit of a rocky start, I do think this movie finds its feet. You know, it is an enjoyable film once you get past that kind of that first act, which even I think knowing what's going on, I still don't know if it makes complete sense. There's a couple of kind of like little logic issues here and there. For example, there's a scene towards the end of the movie where there's a lot of violence happening, and there's 2 orderlies that just seem to disappear. You know, things like that. There's a couple of little nitpicks and stuff. Overall, though, you know, as I say, after a bit of a bumpy start, I think the movie picks up and becomes a very kind of exciting watch and an intriguing watch, and it gets you sucked in. It just, the first act needed some work for me. 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.